Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Run Prep for Landlords. I'm your host, Eric Worrell, and this is episode 261. And we're going to be talking about a top U.S. landlord charged with running a Ponzi scheme and a massive multifamily mortgage fraud probe. So we got all sorts of details on this recent news story that we're going to dive into. We're going to get to all of that right after this.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
All right. So this story has been all over the news, but this particular article I'm taking from housingwire.com. It was written on May 23rd by Jessica Gurin. And I mentioned the title of the article as the intro of this episode. It is Top U.S. Landlord Charged with Running Ponzi Scheme and Massive Multifamily Mortgage Fraud Probe. Said that the DOJ and the SEC have filed multiple charges against Robert Morgan for multi-million-dollar scam. It just sounds like the type of name of somebody who might pull a multi-million-dollar scam. But in this article, I thought it was worth highlighting for a few reasons. It's showing this scam on a very high level as far as what this person was doing to pull it off, but also on an investor level. So if you're somebody who's got some cash lying around, or maybe you've talked to other investors and they're trying to pull you in on deals, I think that this particular story is a good reminder of why it's important to do your homework and understand the financials of what the person is representing to you, and making sure that A, it's not too good to be true, and B, that it will work in your favor in the long run. Obviously, with any kind of investing, there's risk, but sometimes you hear a number that perks up your ears and you go, wow, that sounds too good to be true. And there's a good chance that it is. So we're going to get to that and explain that a little bit further as we read into this story. According to the author here, Jessica, who seems like a lovely lady, says that Robert Morgan was hit with multiple charges this week by both the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission for allegedly running a Ponzi-type scheme that involves shuffling money around from investors and falsifying loan documents. So he is one of the largest landlords in the country who reportedly has 140 properties across 14 states. Now I'm going to assume that this means apartment buildings if we're talking one of the largest landlords in the country. And he was hit with criminal charges on Wednesday by the DOJ for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, and insurance fraud, and then slapped with civil fraud charges from the SEC for siphoning and misusing investor funds. So it says that these charges came to light in last August. They were looking into fraud allegations involving loans and backings of $1.5 billion in mortgage securities issued by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That particular initial investigation led to an indictment of 4 individuals for allegedly conspiring to falsify loan information in order to obtain more than $167 million in multifamily loans. I'm sure, you and I can relate to these kind of numbers quite easily, right? When I go down to the bank and say, hey, I need a loan for $167 million. So 2 of the individuals that were caught up out of the 4 are related to Morgan. The owner of the property is entangled in the mortgage fraud. So it seems the authorities that shifted their focus to Morgan himself. Pretty obvious thing to do, right? Hey, we got 4 people involved in a $167 million loan fraud, and it turns out 2 of them are related to a guy who's one of the largest landlords in the country. Maybe we should look at what he's doing too. So according to the DOJ, Morgan conspired with 3 others over the span of 10 years to fraudulently obtain monies, funds, credits, assets, securities, and other property from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and other financial institutions, including Berkadia Commercial Mortgage and Arbor Commercial Mortgage. So Morgan and his peeps, I didn't really say that in the article, it said associates, allegedly provided false information to those entities to obtain larger loans than they would have otherwise received on multiple properties, even going as far to submit fraudulent construction contracts and invoices that inflated contractor payments, and faking contracts for property purchases that inflated sales prices. So the DOJ alleges that Morgan and his crew kept 2 sets of books, one with accurate accounting and the other thoroughly cooked for lenders that needed information for servicing and refinancing the loans. I'll put an aside on here right now. There is a documentary on Netflix. I can't recall the name of it, but it's about Studio 51, the famous nightclub in New York City, and it's talking about how crazy it was in the 70s. And part of the documentary is about how I believe the owner's mother kept the books, but she kept like everything. So like down to the penny, had everything. So it had like, this money was used for purchasing drugs, and this money was used for this illegal activity and this illegal activity. So when they got raided by the feds, they just like had this book sitting there that was just like, here's everything you've done illegal. So, if you're going to run a legal business, don't hire your mother to do the books, because she's very honest and she's going to do you in. That's the moral of the story here. But it sounds like, Morgan here might have run into this too, how they were keeping two sets of books, and one with accurate information and one with the deceitful information for providing to lenders. So that aside, the SEC's complaint adds more to the heap, alleging that Morgan raised more than $110 million by promising an 11% return to investors, and then diverted much of that cash to pay other investors in a Ponzi-like scheme. So I thought that was really worth highlighting, because if you read the books as far as how to raise private capital, there's people who have marks on them. So what I mean by a mark is like, you may be somebody who might have money that you can contribute. So anybody who is elderly, maybe they have a pension or an IRA that has been funded over years. Maybe they have purchased recent property and that they can find that information through various methods. There's ways that people can figure out, this person might have money. They hang out in this type of club. They do this type of thing. And it might have a mark on you for people to try and say, hey, I've got this great business idea, And in this particular case, it wasn't absolutely ludicrous, the returns that he was promising at 11%. But it's the fact that he promised an 11% return. I mean, as soon as you get into any kind of investment that's like, we guarantee you, 100% promise you that you're going to have returns that are above average market rates, like Warren Buffett's not putting a promise on what his returns are going to be. They're likely going to be pretty good because it's Warren Buffett. But I feel like anytime you hear those kind of absolute kind of discussion and language being used when it comes to investments, that's when the first red flag should go up to maybe do some digging and some homework on this individual. So we're all familiar with Ponzi schemes just based on, the news in the last, 20 years and some of the bigger cases that have arisen from Ponzi schemes. But it's interesting to see this one being played out specifically on Morgan raising private capital to the tune of $110 million and promising that 11% return to investors, and then just diverting much of that cash to pay other investors in a Ponzi-like scheme. I mean, that's what a Ponzi scheme is, right? You just keep getting more money in to help pay the original people who start complaining and speaking up, and eventually all of a sudden you have this big issue because people start finding out and everybody wants their money at the same time and they can't pay you back. So it said the SEC said Morgan's investors are still owed $63 million, so more than half of the $110 million, while the DOJ says lenders are holding the bag for more than $25 million and insurers are out $3 million as a result of the scheming of Morgan and his associates. Really just interesting story here, and you wonder how many lives that this will impact too, because this guy's got loans for $167 million. This means he's got some serious properties, right? It says he's got 140 properties. We must be talking about thousands and thousands of units at each property. And what happens with these properties? I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands of families that live in these properties. You're talking about thousands of investors who have given their money to this person. I don't like doom and gloom, right? I like to assume the best, but situations like this are a good reminder to just say, all right, take a breath. I got this guy who's saying that, he needs money for this investment property he's building. He's guaranteeing me 13% returns, no questions asked. He's got it going on. Well, it might be worth saying, you know what? There was this article I read, Rent Prep for Landlords podcast said this guy was guaranteeing people 11%. Maybe this guy who's guaranteeing me even more than that is doing something a little bit strange, or a lot of times people say something because they want you to believe in them or they want you to, go with the deal. But a guarantee isn't always a guarantee in the end, So I thought that this article is a great reminder for landlords and investors specifically to just make sure you're doing your due diligence, looking into all the numbers. A really good book. I had him on it for an interview is Matt Faircloth of DeRosa Group. They're out in New Jersey area. He wrote the book on raising private capital. Did an interview with him actually on a Facebook Live, but really goes into the details of what you need to be looking for, what you should be aware of. And it's, it's written in a way to somebody who's trying to raise private capital, but for somebody who may invest with somebody who's raising private capital, it's interesting to just to know where their mindset's at and what they're looking for and what things you should be aware of and what to look out for. So be smart with your money. Don't just give it up because somebody's got a great opportunity. Do your homework. That's the long-winded moral of this story. So you can check that out again. That's at housingwire.com, and that's courtesy of Jessica Gurin, who is an editor there, covering reverse mortgages in the housing wealth space. So go ahead and check that out. Episode 261 will be in the show notes along with other information as well. All right, guys, have a great rest of your week and take care.